You've seen his bio, so I won't go into it in great detail, but Nigel Farage is a founder and leader of the UK Independence Party, UKIP, and a member of the European Parliament for South East England since 1999. He led his party through the 2009 European parliamentary elections when it received the second highest share of the popular vote and defeated Labour and Liberal Democrats with over 2 million votes. He is a risk taker, having actually narrowly escaped death in the crash of a small aircraft in 2010 that was pulling a UKIP banner. That's going to the ultimate, effort. He is a libertarian and, of course, a Europe skeptic who has strongly advocated that Britain exit from the European Union. According to that reliable source, Wikipedia, Nigel is noted for his passionate and sometimes controversial speeches. So, Nigel, why don't you come and give us a passionate, controversial speech?
It's a lovely introduction. Thank you very much. Really good. Well, Preston, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I must say that to receive an invitation from the great Preston Manning, who did so very much to totally change the nature of political debate and to reconfigure Canadian politics, was absolutely an irresistible invitation, and thank you. And to be asked to share a platform with John Howard, who did so much to make Australia a really great, global, proud country, even if we beat them at cricket these days. Now, I've just got one small bone to pick with the introduction that I was given. Preston introduced me as being a well-known Eurosceptic. If you look up the word skeptic in the Oxford English Dictionary, it says inclined to doubt. I am not in the least bit doubtful about this European project. I am absolutely, wholly and viscerally opposed to the direction in which this European project is moving, and here's why. Here's why. The attempt to get France and Germany sitting round the table talking to each other in the 1950s was absolutely the right and sensible thing to do. You know, not just the First World War and the Second World War, but a Franco-Prussian War in 1870 as well. 3 times within 70 years, disastrous conflict between France and Germany. So the idea of getting them to talk together and to trade together was a good, sensible idea. And the idea that a lot of us who are European neighbours might want to trade with each other without the imposition of very high tariffs equally was a good, sensible idea. I mean, we all forget that in the 1960s, tariffs were often as high as 30 and 40% on manufactured goods between Western world countries. So all of that was perfectly sensible. And indeed, my mum and dad both voted in 1975 in a referendum for the United Kingdom to stay part of the common market. But you see, communism was rather a good idea in a way, wasn't it? Well, the idea that the world was going to become perfect and fair and lovely, but we saw in practice that the road to hell was paved with good intentions, and so it has become with the European project. Because where Europe is today, ladies and gentlemen, is a very, very dark and dangerous place. Very dark and dangerous indeed. The fundamental misconstruction that is the euro is now leading to untold misery and, I think, potentially huge danger in the Mediterranean countries. You know, many of us warned that it didn't make sense for Greece, Portugal and Spain, and perhaps even Italy too, to go into a full economic and monetary union with the German-dominated north of Europe. It was obvious that halving interest rates overnight to join the Eurozone would lead to a false boom, and so it did. But now what we have in Greece in particular, we have youth unemployment now running at 62% and rising every single week. We have a Greek economy that has contracted by 25% since 2008 and is forecast to contract by another 5% this year. We have had hundreds of thousands of people on the streets in Spain, Portugal and Greece protesting, often violently, at what is being done to them. And the recipe, we're told, is more of the same. More of the same. And indeed, I met the German Chancellor Angela Merkel about 18 months ago to talk about this. Now, it's a very odd thing, but I find myself as one of the 7 leaders of a group in the European Parliament. And this means they have to invite me to all the official functions, which is something that I enjoy very much more than they do. So I was at this lunch, and the German Chancellor was there, sitting across the table, and I can let you into a little secret about Angela Merkel, that in private, she's even more miserable than she looks in public. And I said, Chancellor, wouldn't it be a liberation for the German taxpayer, who's just spent 20 years paying for the reintegration of Eastern Germany back into Western Germany? Wouldn't it be a liberation for them not to have to sign blank checks in perpetuity to the Club Med countries? And really, wouldn't your own voters be happier with that situation? And wouldn't it, for the Greeks, be a chance of salvation to leave the euro, to have a massive competitive devaluation, to write off much of their debt, to regain their democracy, and to try and trade their way back to profitability, much in the same way that Iceland has done since 2008. Oh no, Mr. Farage, she said. Greece must not be allowed to leave the euro, because if Greece leaves the euro, other countries will leave too, and that will be the end of our European dream. Well, there is a bit of me that says I'll drink to that, I suppose. But what she's really saying, and what Mr. Barroso is saying, and what Mr. Herman Van Rompuy, I can never quite keep a straight face when I mention his name, but what they're saying is, whatever the social cost, whatever the economic cost, we must continue with the project. And in maintaining this project, what they have done is they have literally stripped out all forms of democracy from those countries. Greece is now run by a troika. Representatives from the European Commission, the European Central Bank and the IMF, once a fortnight, fly into Athens airport, go and see the Greek Prime Minister and tell him what tax rates must be, what spending can be. All democracy is gone. In fact, it even got so bad that a couple of years ago, when the Greek Prime Minister suggested a referendum on staying in the euro, within 48 hours, the bully boys of Brussels had removed him and replaced him with a puppet. And the same thing happened in Italy too. You know, this is really very, very worrying. The economics isn't working, and therefore the logic is, let's destroy nation-state democracy and let's place all the power that we can at the centre. Well, I think that is damn dangerous, because surely the whole point about democracy is, however much we may dislike the government that's in power, what we do is we battle for another party with a different manifesto to take over and institute new policies. It's called parliamentary democracy. It matters. But if you take away from people their ability to determine their own future through the ballot box, if voting, as it now in Greece and Spain is, doesn't make any difference at all, then if you want change, there's only one thing you're left with, and that is civil disobedience or civil disorder. And I think that as those countries get poorer and poorer, we are getting to a point where I think there will be some kind of extreme violence, possibly even a revolution in those countries, as they fight to bring down governments or a political class that has led them into this mess. And there's another irony. You know, the European project that was designed to make us all love each other has now split Europe from north to south. And we now see Greek and Italian newspapers characterizing the Germans as wearing swastikas. This would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. And we read the German newspapers saying that everybody, in Southern Europe is useless and lazy and we should stop giving them money. It's actually breeding tension. But the real worry is this, that the opposition to the European project may well not come in the future from people like me, because the project that was designed to stop extreme nationalism will, by the very nature of how it's behaving, breed extreme nationalism. And that is a huge concern. Now, in Italy, of course, this has manifested itself with a stand-up comedian getting 26% of the vote, which I think is rather fun. It's actually quite difficult to tell who the jokers are in Europe these days. And that's fine. That's fine. He may be slightly anarchic, but there's no way in which Mr. Grillo is dangerous. But look what's happening in Greece. The third biggest party in Greece today, ladies and gentlemen, is a neo-Nazi party. That isn't me chucking around a pejorative term. That is their own definition of where they are and what they stand for. And if we don't get a democratic solution to this European problem, I'm afraid we'll see parties like that rising all over Europe. And I want to do everything I can to stop that from happening. When I was elected in 1999 and I came into politics, prior to that, I'd spent 20 years in business. I was a member of the Conservative Party during Mrs. Thatcher's years when she modernised Britain and I believe made us a very much better country. Very much better country. But when I got into politics in 1999, I did so believing that the United Kingdom was a square peg in a round hole, that the whole European system of law, justice, their traditions of democracy was so fundamentally different to ours that we simply should revert to a trade relationship. But if the rest of Europe wanted it, then I was very happy for them to have it. Well, I can tell you now that my position has changed completely. Not only do I want the United Kingdom outside of this political union, I want Europe, real Europe, that is nation states of Europe. I want them outside the European Union too, and let's have a Europe of democracy, trade and peace. And that is my vision for the future of Europe. Well, in response to all of this, you may ask, what are the United Kingdom political class doing? Well, it is astonishing that we have a Liberal Democrat Party, a Labour Party, and a so-called Conservative Party, all completely united behind the view that not only should the United Kingdom remain a member, but that the Eurozone should take yet more power to run the affairs of those 17 Eurozone countries from the centre. They all support it. And indeed, on virtually every major issue that we talk about in our country, we see between the three parties in Britain that they frankly now all become social democrat parties, and frankly, you can't put a cigarette paper between them on the really big substantive issues of the day. They are dominated from top to bottom by career politicians, by people who've gone straight from the top private schools in England to the best Oxbridge colleges, straight into research offices and straight into politics. They've never done a job in the real world. They are disconnected completely, particularly from those blue-collar voters that John Howard was talking about earlier. They don't understand the thoughts, hopes and aspirations of ordinary people. And I have to say that David Cameron, a man who, in my opinion, stands four square behind nothing really in particular, now has a very major crisis with his party. You see, when I was a Conservative member, the Conservative Prime Minister used to talk about free markets, enterprise, aspiration, social mobility. Today's Conservative Prime Minister talks about gay marriage and the need for wind turbines. And he is completely alienating his supporters. So into that gap has stepped UKIP. And we're absolutely clear in what we believe in. Nobody doubts in the country what we stand for. We believe the best people to govern Britain are the British people themselves, and we should do so through the ballot box, proudly through the Westminster Parliament. It's clear. And we believe that controlling borders and controlling immigration into your country is one of the most fundamentally important points and responsibilities of any government. But we have completely abrogated that now, because we now have a total open door to the whole of Eastern Europe. You know, they told us in 2004, when Poland joined the Union, they told us we could expect up to 13,000 people a year. In the first 2 years, 1 million came. Immigration into Britain from World War II up until the turn of the century ran at 30 to 50,000 people a year. Immigration to Britain in the last decade has averaged 500,000 people a year. We have literally lost control. And the argument that we're putting forward in UKIP is that it's not racist to talk about immigration. It's a sensible, responsible thing to do. And what we very much want, is to have the kind of immigration policy that John Howard brought into Australia, where you take people into your country who want to become part of your country, who want to become part of your culture, and who have skills to bring that will benefit society. That is the immigration policy that we're fighting for in the UK. And we're a party that is taking on some of the absolute madness of what we're doing in the name of combating global warming. You know, I took the comments that Preston made earlier very sensibly. Look, I have no idea, personally, whether CO2 emissions are leading to a warmer planet. I don't know. What I do know, of course, is that there has been no global warming since the mid-1990s. But what I'm certain of is that if we beggar our manufacturing industries with carbon taxes, which we're doing, and if, as we've seen in the last 18 months, both of the UK aluminium smelters have closed down, one of our biggest steel plants up in Redcar in the northeast has closed down, and now the British cement industry tell me that they will be closing down, possibly even the oil refineries in the UK will be closing down, because we're following a god of carbon taxes, whilst at the same time India and China are frankly totally ignoring them, that this is really a crazy path for us to go down. So, you know, we must be responsible environmentally, but beggaring your own industry, when as a country we only produce 3% of global CO2, we think is a crazy path, and we want to help manufacturing industry, and we want to help small business by doing many of the things that Ronnie Reagan did back in the 1980s and saying to small companies, all this employee protection may sound wonderful in theory, but in practice, it stops small firms from employing people. Lift the yoke of regulation off Britain's entrepreneurs and let them get on with the job. And we want the United Kingdom to have a new role in the world. You know, we have become totally Eurocentric in our thinking. It is a remarkable fact that the European Union is not a free trade area, it's a customs union. It's a very old-fashioned, outdated concept, but that's what it is. And because we're members of a customs union, we, as the world's 6th largest economy, are prohibited from making any bilateral trade deals with any other country in the world. That can only be done for us by the European Union. Now, there is, of course, a negotiation going on at the moment between the European Union and Canada. But frankly, we, as an independent country, could have signed that free trade deal with Canada, and we could have done it 20 years ago, and we should have done it 20 years ago. And the same logic applies to Australia. You know, we buy a lot of Australian wine, but we'd buy even more if we weren't putting huge tariffs on Australian wine. And the same goes for New Zealand lamb. And you may see a theme developing here that I've always been struck that there are a group of countries. In fact, the populations of those countries number just over 2 billion people. And amongst nearly all of those countries, we've got some things in common. We share a language. We share a tradition of common law. We have similar accounting practices. We even, in many cases, have similar employment law. We have stood together through very, very tough times against a dark and dangerous world to defend democracy and liberty. We are, in many cases, kith and kin. We're related to each other. We're friends with each other. And what my country has done, shamefully, is we turned our backs on you. We turned our backs on you to pursue political union in Europe, but we never really explained to the British people actually what was happening. So I want us not just to be divorced from political union with Europe, I want us to turn the Anglosphere and the Commonwealth into a vibrant trading bloc fit for the 21st century. Thank you very much.